From LinkedIn News, I'm Leah Smart, host of Everyday Better, an award-winning podcast dedicated to personal development. Join me every week for captivating stories and research to find more fulfillment in your work and personal life. Listen to Everyday Better on the LinkedIn Podcast Network, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
The HP AI PC breaks language barriers instantly by translating up to 44 languages in real time, powered by the Intel Core Ultra processor. With the right tools, work doesn't have to feel like work. Learn more at hp.com/AI-PC.
Hey, I'm Kwame Christian, and you are about to step into the world of Negotiate Anything, the #1 negotiation podcast in the world where we teach you how to make difficult conversations easier while getting more of what you want in the process. Each episode is packed with practical tips and strategies from the experts. We delve into negotiation, conflict resolution, and leadership skills that are crucial in both business and in life. Whether you're closing a deal, managing a team, or navigating personal relationships, Negotiate Anything provides you with the tools you need to succeed. Our conversations are real, relatable, and most importantly, rooted in practicality. So if you're ready to transform your conversations and elevate your negotiation skills, join me on Negotiate Anything. Subscribe and listen on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you love to listen. Let's make every conversation a winning negotiation. Enda, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Kwame. Absolutely delighted to be here.
Yes, we are delighted to have you, my friend. So how about you get us started by telling us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Thanks, Kwame. Well, first of all, again, thanks for having me on. As I was saying to you just a minute or two ago, I've been using your podcast to tell a lot of my students to go listen to this podcast if you want to hear some of the most influential people in our field. So just to say that up front, so thank you, man. Myself, my name's Enda Young, and I have been involved in conflict resolution, negotiation, mediation, one shape or form or other for about 20 years. I'm currently the managing director of Mediation Northern Ireland, and I kind of joke with people. I'm a recovering mechanical engineer. That was my original degree, but I got involved in this work early as a teenager, and maybe I can tell you a little bit about that as well, of why I do what I do. I guess So that's me.
This is great, and I've been excited to have you on the show for months now. Thank you for your patience when it came to scheduling. And you have such an interesting background because you have the negotiation background, you have the mediation background, but then also where you're from, Northern Ireland. And I feel like people don't fully appreciate the conflict that was happening in that area of the world. And so can you start off by telling us a little bit about that story and how that impacted your journey?
Yeah, absolutely, Kwame. I suppose my own journey started when I was a teenager. I was about 16 or 17 years old, and I got involved in what we would call cross-community work then. Largely, bluntly speaking, between people who would identify as Catholic and people who identify as from a Protestant background. For myself, in the context, we had our Good Friday Belfast Peace Agreement, in 1998. But before that, we'd lost about 3,500 people, and with injuries of over 50,000 people had been injured during our conflict or troubles. And this month in particular is the 35th anniversary of one particular bomb by the IRA in Enniskillen. And that particular bomb, I guess my connection with it was in that bomb at the time. Two particular individuals were caught up on it. One called Gordon Wilson and his daughter Marie. And when the bomb went off, they buried both of those individuals in the rubble. And Marie was buried in the rubble with her father, Gordon. And her last words that he had heard her say at the time were, "Daddy, I love you very much," before she passed. And what was famous at the time was Gordon was then filmed by the BBC, and how horrific a circumstance that was. He said at the time, "I bear no ill will, I bear no grudge. Dirty sort of talk is not going to bring her back to life." And at that time, that time, I was 25 years of violence. It had a huge impact, particularly emotionally. And it became known that, by what Gordon said at the time, really did stop retaliations at that moment in time, for that particular bombing. From his, I guess, that act of reconciliation or act of, I don't know, not forgiveness, but what he said and how he said it, then an organization grew out of that, and he set up called the Spirit of Enniskill. And that organization, basically every year, 50 young people went away. Each group had 10 people, 5 girls, 5 boys, 5 Catholics, 5 Protestants. And you went on an 8-month program. And I was one of those people who went away on that program. We ended up being in Maine, Penobscot, in a job corps for a few weeks. Ended up, learning the basics of facilitation, conflict resolution, conflict analysis, and things like that. And during that program, when we came home, one day, this two people came into the organization and did a 1-day training session on mediation. And I remember, I must have been 17 at the time, and I remember just going, wow, what is that? And how do I do that for the rest of my life, right? So I did my engineering, got my degree, and kind of went back and switched from mechanical engineering to my master's was in theory, culture, and identity, really focused on conflict transformation. So that was a bit of a shock to the system, but again, it's what I say to a lot of people when I'm coaching them as well, Kwame, is like, regardless of how difficult it was, you got to follow that bit of fire in your belly, right? Why do you do what you do? And I kind of reflect now down the line, I'm glad I made that choice because it defined me, right? And it is that thing that gives me passion. And it's the whole Simon Sinek of the why, right? That's my kind of purpose, I think. So because of that, then I've been lucky to have done an awful lot of work nationally, internationally, lecturing, training, working with everyone, some of the world's major companies in Dubai, Malaysia, working a lot with the World Health Organization, lecturing at Queen's University, Belfast, and I now currently am the managing director, as I said, of Mediation Northern Ireland. Gone back to that. It was that organization which trained me 20 years ago. And I'm now, I guess, trying to see what they do over the next 25 years, right?
Wow. That is incredible. Just kudos to you. Yeah, it's an incredible story, and your perseverance and focus in this is really inspiring. And then also for me, it's cool to see that there's so many people around the world having the same kind of awakening, like how you went through that program and you said, mediation, what is that? I want all of that. I want that in my life, right? And so for me, it was negotiation and conflict resolution. It's like, how do I make that happen? So it's really cool to see you matriculating and like growing in this and then helping spread this message throughout the world. So kudos to you on that.
Hey, thanks, Kwame. And I listened to your podcast, and you see, it was the world of mediation that got me into negotiation, right? And I love that idea of the fundamental basics underneath it, because for me, regardless of where you are in the world, people are people. Hurt is hurt, harm is harm. The cultural nuance changes, the lens changes, right? The amount of money might change, but the fundamental belief, and that's what I've seen wherever I've worked, is the fundamental thing that makes us remains the same. And it's the unpacking of that becomes really interesting.
Yes. Well, let's start unpacking it. Let's begin this interesting journey. This is great. Let's start. So one of the things that you talked about was the intersection between negotiation and mediation. Tell us more about that.
Again, it goes back to the idea of, and I maybe even coaching sometimes into that as well a little bit, right? But maybe I'll come back to that. I think that idea of how do we strive for alternative dispute resolution mechanisms? What are the other ways of dealing with conflict outside of violence, right? Outside of the more destructive elements. And for me, the relationships and the skill sets between negotiation and mediation are the same, right? I mean, the stuff that a lot of your speakers and a lot of your listeners will be very au fait with. How do we listen? How do we paraphrase? How do we summarize? How do we focus on dialogue and not just debate, and all of those elements? So I think there's a fundamental, connection there. I think then when you look at the similarity between, for example, mediation and coaching, which for me, a lot of these sit within that same spectrum, the belief that the person in front of you has the answer, right? And as a mediator, that's what we're here to tease out, to find. And the belief is I'm not there to fix it. I'm there to help them find their way to their solution. And the same with coaching, executive coaching, right? And ironically, the people who I've seen struggle sometimes the most when I'm training professional mediators, for example, are sometimes professional negotiators, right? And part of that for me is quite often I see really highly skilled professional negotiators who are brilliant at what they do, super experienced, but they're fixers, right? They're people who are good at fixing and have been trained to fix, maybe naturally inclined that way. And then when I'm training in mediation, normally gets, day 2, day 3 in a 5-day program. And sometimes they're really struggling. And they're struggling to take that step back because they're still in fixing mode. And actually the idea that, it's not your conflict, therefore it shouldn't be your solution, can be quite challenging to people who just want to fix.
There's so much to dig into here. So let's go deeper. When somebody wants to fix, let's say it might be somebody who has negotiation background, whatever it happens to be, they want to fix. What is it within themselves that they need to change in order to adopt a better mindset to be a better mediator?
Oh, I love that question. I think it comes down to being able to let go. Right? It's that maxim, it's not your conflict, therefore it's not your solution. And sometimes it's one of those moments in training where you're just waiting for something to click, and I see this, training professional coaches as well. And I think for me, it comes down to the intention behind the action. Are you doing it for you or are you doing it for them? Also, this idea that let's take it from a very practical standpoint. If you are the negotiator who's now working in a mediation capacity and you see the solution, you feel the solution, and then you give the solution, yeah, again, it might make you feel good, right? And it gives you that, dopamine hit and all of that stuff. And it might work. It might work in the short term. But I guarantee you this, if you go back in the long term, you've removed ownership over that solution, right? And it's now your solution, which might work on paper, but how much real emotional investment do those individuals have who've been in that room with you? And particularly then if you're dealing with different power constructs, right? People will say yes if they know that, their boss needs them to say yes, for example, right? Or in a community setting, there may be other pressures there, for example. So who are you doing it for? And are you sure?
Hello, my friends. Before we get back to today's episode, I want to ask you a question. Have you ever wondered how to elevate your team's negotiation game and how you can help the folks on your team have better, difficult conversations? At the American Negotiation Institute, we offer transformative keynotes and workshops tailored to empower professionals with top-tier negotiation and conflict resolution skills. Whether it's a keynote for your next event or hands-on training for your team, we've got you covered. Don't just negotiate. Master the art with the American Negotiation Institute. Click the link in the description to find out more. Elevate, negotiate, and succeed.
Hey you, I'm Andrew Seaman. Do you want a new job? Or do you want to move forward in your career? Well, you should listen to my weekly show called Get Hired with Andrew Seaman. We talk about it all. And it's waiting for you, yes you, wherever you get your podcasts. Introducing the HP AI PC, your powerful AI assistant. Easily search through personal files, gain valuable insights, and make smarter, more informed business decisions. Unlock the future of work today with the HP AI PC, powered by the Intel Core Ultra processor. With the right tools, work doesn't have to feel like work. Learn more at hp.com/AIPC.
Oh man, again, listen, and I need you to stop giving answers that are so profound because I have so many different angles that I want to go with my follow-up questions. Okay, so let's this is so good. Okay, so I love the fact that you're asking that grounding question. Are you doing it for you or doing it for them? Because I know there have been times in my life where I realize, why am I pushing so hard? What is this? Oh, this is about me. Because as a negotiator, sometimes we have that deal making bias. And then
Yeah,
we make it
definitely.
about ourselves by saying, listen, if I'm a good negotiator, I can get this done. And it
Yeah,
becomes very problematic, especially in your personal life, because now you're removing somebody's autonomy and agency, and they feel like you're forcing them. And it reminds me of one of the things, a saying somebody brought up in one of the trainings, and I told her, I'm like, listen, I'm going to put this in every training going going forward. Collaboration builds commitment.
yeah,
Collaboration builds
yeah,
commitment. If they
absolutely.
feel as though they can look at the deal and see some of themselves in the deal, they can look back and remember the process and see that they contributed to it.
Uh,
Now they're bought in because it's not your deal, it's my deal. And I want this
yeah,
to succeed. And so we
totally.
have to be able to remove ourselves, not just by recognizing, hey, my ego is now getting in the way, but
Yeah,
also we realize that even if I let my ego get in the way and I do get a deal done, it's good
yeah,
for me, but it's
yeah.
not good for them, because the deal, what we want are lasting deals where people are bought in. That's really, really
Absolutely.
important.
Absolutely. I mean, and I think, the ways that we can help negate that are, having good professional supervision as a mediator, for example, can help that. Having that, sounding board outside of the system and the process that you're currently working on. And the same as, coaches having coaches as well, right? Having someone to work that through, you know?
Absolutely. It's critical. It's critical. When you are seeing people going through this process, because
Mhm.
you've trained a countless amount of mediators at this
Yeah.
point, what
Yeah.
would you say are the elements that separate the good mediators from the great mediators?
Uh, Um, I think a few things. One, curiosity, um, the ability to take that step back, emotional maturity sometimes, um, and the ability to realize that you're not always right and there's always more to learn, I think. And, when you do get those individuals on programs who are clearly, coming from a, maybe previous experience or maybe naturally, inclined towards this work, the idea of going, actually, I do need to do some stuff on myself. That somebody said to me really, years ago, that really defined it really well. A good friend of mine who works for UCAN in Canada, it's about knowing your stuff, your own stuff, and I mean that in a non-patronizing sense.
Yeah.
Realizing that you got to know your own conflict resolution style. Sorry, are you more inclined to avoid? Are you, and again, somebody said to me, a mentor from years ago, Murray Fitzstoff, said to me, some people who work in this field, and I mean that as negotiation, mediation, conflict resolution in general, sometimes some of us tend to be naturally attracted to conflict, and we got to be careful with
Wow.
that. you know um
Oh, that's fascinating. Go deeper on that last point.
yeah, I mean, I think I've seen, if you've ever tried to get a group of mediators to agree on something, for example, you right, or you're training people in the negotiation room, and particularly experienced negotiators, senior negotiators, and you're trying to, decide what you're doing, for the evening and what restaurant you're going to go out to. Those small nuances, even those small things become interesting because, again, you have people who are highly skilled, and depending on where they're on their own professional journey, how, their own levels of self-awareness, their own levels of emotional resilience, their own levels of stress, all of that mix that makes us who we are today, not 6 years ago when we did our last CPD training course, right?
This is great. It makes so much sense. And I genuinely got a big old kick out of what you said, trying to get mediators and negotiators to agree, because it's so true. And I think a lot of times we can't turn it off. It's like, hey, okay, we can't do it. And then it's
Yeah,
also these
yeah,
interactions turn into ego measuring competitions. Let's call it ego measuring, right? Where it's like, oh,
absolutely.
you're a good mediator, well, I'm a better one. You're a good
Yeah,
negotiator, I'm a better one. Oh, we're
yeah,
making a decision on where to go, let me try to influence that decision, just kind of to show off how good I am at this. And then when you bring it
absolutely.
to the actual conflicts
Yeah,
itself, like the
yeah,
ones that matter, right? So the negotiations, the difficult conversations where we're having with somebody else, or as mediators, where we are trying to essentially facilitate an agreement between two parties, a lot of times we start to inject ourselves into the process inappropriately in a way that doesn't serve us, but just serves our ego, right? And it holds us back.
Absolutely. And I think that ego, I was working with some really fantastic facilitators in Germany recently, and I just loved how they operated. They were, there's three of us facilitating this, 5-day sort of conflict resolution, negotiation training. And the two of them kept, because we've been working each other for years, kept checking in. I'm really sorry I said that, that was my ego that meant that. And I just love that level of professionalism with which you can use other people to check your own ego and be completely honest. And when I'm training negotiating teams as well, it's that idea of going, have you given the other members of your team permission to pull you on your ego? And particularly if you're the boss, particularly if you're the lead negotiator, right? Because quite often it's that idea, it's the age-old manager, my door's always open, and then you do the 360 assessment. Not necessarily what the feedback said, right?
Yep. No, you're so right. And I think it takes a lot of humility and self-awareness to recognize that. And I think one of the things that's really helpful is when you realize that these just flaws and mistakes, those type of things, they are not an indication of a lack of worth for you as a professional or a human. It's just an indication of your humanity. And we're just all at the end of the day trying to become better people. And so the faster I can acknowledge that and take the feedback on the chin and say, you know what, Enda, you're right. That was a bad call on my part. And when I look at myself, I think that was purely ego, my bad.
Yeah, absolutely.
Everybody elevates because of it.
Completely. And it is then how and what we do, it gives the people permission around us to do the same, right? Big time, and again, it's the mirroring behaviors, it's all the stuff that we know about. And sometimes it's the stuff that we forget about when we're busy, right? When we're in the flow of the negotiation, when we're in the flow of the mediation, when we're focused on the process around us, but sometimes, we forget about the emotional legacy with which we leave those conversations sometimes as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that you mentioned earlier when you talked about the skills of great negotiators was the ability to step back. And step back, you can think about it physically, it seems pretty easy. Okay, and I took a step back, right? But when you say step back, there are several layers to it. So what does that mean to you?
I love that. And it's something I've become really interested in over the last few years, particularly when I'm coaching people, doing conflict coaching, or helping people become unstuck. I was coaching someone recently, and they were really struggling. I was working with this individual, a senior level manager, for a year, and it took him about 3/4 of the way through the year of coaching. Then I get it now. This is, I was able to, take that step back, but we did a deep dive. And, I love the work of Uri and Fisher, and we're all familiar with going to the balcony, right? And I love that term. Then we unpack that term. What does the term mean? So for some people, it's about, seeing each word that's said at that moment in time. And I kind of parallel it with first aid, right? If you're trained as a first responder, you can walk in and help if there's a crash on their motorway system or the road. But if you don't take a step back, guess what happens? You get hit by the next car and you become part of the problem. And for me, it's exactly the same thing as you going to the balcony. So, so we analyze that when I'm coaching people. So what do? How do you talk to yourself? And if you're getting really, really fast, well, then slow how you talk to yourself down. If you're shouting at yourself, guess what? Go softer. If, for some people, putting the tongue to the roof of their mouth acts as a physical anchor, and it, switches off those parts of the brain responsible for speech. Other people, as I said, see each individual word. Other people focus on their breathing. Other people twiddle their toes, right, to anchor themselves, or anchor points on their thumb and their finger. But fundamentally, I guarantee you this, to your listener or whoever's there, you already do this, right? We already go to the balcony, and yet often there are times we do it better than others. And it's that deconstruction of the times we do it better that interests me. So when's the last time you did it really well? And what was the difference between that time and the time where you were tired, or you were grumpy, you were whatever that might be? And if you can deconstruct that, then you can repeat that.
Oh, this is good. Because what I'm realizing as you describe it is that essentially everybody's balcony is different.
Yeah.
And so when we describe it, I love that Fisher and Urey would get into, yes, they described it so well. And then I know that there are some people who read their work and said, it doesn't really resonate. Well, then maybe you need to go to a different place, right? So for them, it might be described as a balcony. For me, as somebody who loves chess, it might be walk to the other side of the table. Because I naturally, if I'm playing in person, I can naturally feel myself like, okay, I need to stand up. I'm going to look from a different angle, right? And so whatever works for you, you have to figure that out. And there will be times where you're better. And so like, I'll disclose some examples. So I know for me, I'm better in general at work than I am at home. So like if it's a business negotiation, imagine like with a client, that's super easy because it's easy to detach. It becomes harder when it's colleagues at work, but still a little bit easier than it is at home with family and friends because those relationships are more lasting, right? And so then I realized, what is the mentality that helps me to do well in those? It's going to the balcony looks different. So for me in a mediation, I think to myself, listen, this is not my conflict, right? And so I'm here to be the level head. If I'm not level headed, then who will be? So it's my responsibility. So I can I can pull myself back because it's not mine. But then at home, what I have to do is I have to say, I always say to myself, what would I tell somebody else to do? Because that puts me back into that, like the role of a professional. So I'm going to be more compassionate and empathetic with my tone, but I'm going to remember, stick to the fundamentals, listen, use empathy, use the compassionate curiosity framework, whatever it is. And so I stick to that form, but I have to have like a little Kwame coach in my head, know? So it's really cool to see that, you can get to that same destination using different methodologies.
Absolutely. And I think it changes as well, right? Because it changes, with our own emotional resilience, our own levels of caffeine intake, or sleep, nutritional arrangements, exercise, all of those things affect that moment in time. So that idea of, preparation, before we go in as and I know you've got a really good preparation sheet on your website, all of that, all of that comes into your ability to go to the balcony today, before your next negotiation, before your next mediation. Even those 30 seconds and we know how it affects her from a neurological and biological perspective. For me, I focus on my tone, right? Obviously Chris Voss talks about, the cool, late night DJ voice, or my wife calls it my UN voice, right? There's that, right? So tonality is a big thing for me. And I think that helps me focus on where I need to be at that moment in time, as well as breathing. And the last thing, and it comes from work of Susan Davis as well, around emotional intelligence and stuff like that from Harvard, is that idea of your mantra, right? Very quick one, all problems want to be solved. All problems want to be solved, right? It's something like that. It works for me, right? And everyone, as you said, is different. And I love exploring that with individuals and going, well, what's yours right now? And what is it on your best days?
This is good. Oh man, there is so much. And I think at this point it's very clear we need to have you back on. We need to have you back on, man. This is too good. And listen, little Easter egg for the listeners too. I am promising everybody I will be in Europe, unless there's another pandemic. Okay, hopefully not. I will be in Europe in the summer of 2023. So hopefully we can make that happen. And maybe next time we do it, we could do it in person. That'd be pretty cool.
I love that. Well, find yourself officially invited to Belfast, Kwame.
Hey, I appreciate it, brother. Well, listen, before you go, remind the listeners about your incredible work and how they can get in touch with you.
Thank you, man. Thanks for having me on, man. And you can find me on LinkedIn, Enda Young, and on our website for Mediation Northern Ireland at mediationni.org. Reach out, folks. I'm always happy to chat. That's my job.
This is great. Enda, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Kwame. Thanks so much for having me on, buddy. Thank you.
Congratulations! You've just joined an elite club. By listening to a full episode, you're now officially on the Negotiate Anything team. So welcome aboard. What most team members do is they subscribe to the podcast because that allows them to automatically get the latest episodes of the show. The best things in life lie on the other side of difficult conversations. Keep learning, keep practicing, and keep getting better. Your relationships will improve, your career will soar, and you'll have the confidence you need to get the most out of these crucial conversations. Again, thank you for joining the team. We're excited to have you, and I will see you in the next episode. I'll catch you later.